Welcome to another EMF Warriors podcast. Today we are talking again more about EHS, which is electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome. Really what it is, it's a form of microwave illness. The term has really gotten renamed in the last, 20 years. But, this is really an ongoing problem that a lot of people are facing. A lot of people at EMF Warriors, I even face it myself. I've been kind of EHS or electrosensitive, or I have different microwave illnesses in my vision and my hearing, and I get feelings and tingles and stuff. But who I have with us today, her name is Kate Corcoran, and she has a background in public health. She's also has really a lot of EHS issues that she's developed over the last decade or more, and she has really she's really knows this issue inside and out from a lot of different perspectives, and I think everybody's going to enjoy this podcast tremendously. Another thing she's been doing is she has this amazing idea which is called Canaries. And Canaries is an acronym for Citizens Affected by Non-Ionizing Artificial Radiation, Insisting Environmental Safety. That's right, because we want to get this message out to the world. And she's got some interesting ideas planned that we'll hear about as well. And of course, like many of us that have electrosensitivities, Kate has also adjusted her life in many different ways, and we're going to hear about that as well. So it's nice for you to be on, Kate. Welcome.
Thanks, Scott. It's nice to be here.
So yes, so let's just the video didn't kick in there for people, but you'll see her in just a minute. The next thing I want to do is just start asking about your whole past. When was that moment? What happened a long time ago when you started getting some electromagnetic hypersensitivity in your life? And also, how did you start really connecting the dots that it was two EMF exposures?
So I started getting sick in 2005, so just over, 12 or so years ago. And prior to that, I was pretty fit and active and, generally healthy, and didn't go to the doctor very much. And in 2005, I just started to feel sort of like, probably it was chronic fatigue, but no doctor called it that, and my sleep was disturbed and stuff like that. And but it wasn't until 2012 really that I started to connect the dots that it might be associated with sort of this, what I call sort of broadly the electrical environment. And I didn't connect the dots at all, really. It was a friend of mine who I went to university with. We studied together in undergraduate university, and she had worked out why her young son was getting sick and had started researching it. And she's got a background in molecular biology and immunology and had been digging into the literature. Mm-hmm. So she was sort of gently talking to me saying, look, I'm concerned, this is why you're so unwell. Can I come and measure your place? Blah, blah, blah. So really, I didn't connect the dots, and I wouldn't probably have done so unless my friend had helped me, and doctors weren't talking about it. So
Yeah. So what specific symptoms were you getting back then?
So at the time I lived in the centre of Sydney, in one of the sort of inner suburbs of Sydney, in an apartment. And I suppose broadly in 2005, 6, 7, that sort of time frame, it was chronic fatigue, so big fatigue, respiratory problems. So I went from never getting a cold to literally a cold every 6 weeks, and probably more than a cold at times, like possibly pneumonia and things like that. My gut issues, which I'd probably always had a sensitive gut, but the gut issues went from kind of sensitive, be careful with what you eat, to nothing worked, like as in whatever I ate. It felt like my gut had almost stopped peristalsis. Yeah, so that was a big issue. Sleep became a big issue. I'd been a very normal sleeper to waking in the early days. I woke up once a night, then over a number of months, it turned, say 6 months, it went from once a night I'd waking up 5 times a night, most nights of the week. And then after a month or so of that, I'd sleep like the dead person and go, hallelujah, I've slept, and would wake up feeling like I'd been hit over the head. I'd had such a deep sleep, but that only happened once every 2 months, and
Right.
the rest of the time I just wasn't sleeping, and probably muscle weakness. But then fast forward a bit to a little bit later, still living in Sydney, probably 2010, 11, 12. I think I got increasing neurological symptoms at that point. I mean, when I first moved into this apartment in 2005, I got a couple of migraines, which was very unusual. And I just said to my friend I was living with, look, I'm not going dancing. I feel a bit sick. I'll stay home, turned off the lights, etc. Nothing happened from 2.5 till about 2.11 or so. And then I started getting regular migraines and thyroid soreness, aching thyroid, I would describe it as, and tingling hands and feet and head, which I'd notice when I'd go to bed and go, oh, that's really weird. My head's tingling. So, and all the other issues were sort of progressively getting worse. So, yeah.
So with your thyroid, did you go see a doctor about that? And what kind of prognosis was that? Because that could be a quite serious thing if your thyroid starts going.
Yeah, so my thyroid stimulating hormone levels were normal, and I didn't have autoimmune antibodies. So they concluded, well, okay, it's not autoimmune damage to my thyroid. And doctors weren't really taking me seriously, but I found an endocrinologist, and I told my story, and he sort of took one look at me and said, after 30 minutes of hearing my story, he said, look, Kate, I can tell straight away you've got a problem with your thyroid. I can see the lump. So by this stage, the lump was visible to him, and he didn't need to palpate. He could see it, and he could see from my physicalness that he thought there was a problem. He did some tests, and I had said, look, they've done the blood tests. There's apparently nothing wrong. And he did the tests and almost did a backflip and said, look, there's nothing wrong with your thyroid. Like, he got a shock. He's a very senior physician. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he monitored me for at least a couple of years. And he initially had said, look, you've got a big nodule. It was a cold nodule. So they're ones they're nodules that replace, I suppose, healthy tissue in the thyroid, but they don't produce thyroid hormone. So you're at risk of losing a lot of healthy tissue the bigger it gets. And when he first saw me, he said, look, let's do a biopsy. We did that. It was fine. And he said, look, it's a big nodule. A little biopsy may still miss malignancy. Would you like to have a hemithyroidectomy, so removing half? And I said, look, I'm not feeling great. I'm okay with the risk level. You've checked it out. I understand there's a risk of malignancy, but no, I don't want surgery. So can we just watch this baby? And we did that for 2 years or so, and it was growing. And he got to the point where his head in his hands, and I'm thinking, oh, the game's up. I think he's going to say, I'm getting too worried about this. And had surgery. It was all clear. They sectioned it and half removed, and onto thyroxine to stop the hyperstimulation of the gland, I suppose. And that was his recommendation. And I saw him 6 weeks after surgery. And again, it's almost a head in hands moment where he said, oh my goodness, the nodules on the other side are growing really rapidly now. They were very small. He said, you're going to lose the rest of your thyroid. And anyhow, so that was no need for surgery at the time. It was still aching and la-di-da, and then I left the city and, got to a point where I was going, he was a very good clinician. All the neurological symptoms were getting worse, and I was thinking, well, the next step is, do I see a neurologist? Mm-hmm. Or listening to my friend talking about what she was learning about. I was at the point where, should I drop back a day of work? I'm not sure that I continue this. Should I go to the country? Then there'll be no doctors. What will I do? La la. So I just thought, you go to a neurologist, you'll pay a lot of money. They'll be looking for some rare genetic disorder. You might have it, but the likelihood is you don't. What's the likelihood my friend is correct? And I thought, right, the game's up. And they were moving, and had set up their house in a suburb in the outer sort of area of Sydney. And I said, look, you'll be renting for 6 months. How about I come and rent partially from you because you've set up the house properly? That's a good test, because I was struggling to find an apartment that would be suitable or a place, and I couldn't afford to rent a house in the sort of closer area of Sydney. Yeah.
Wow. So what happened right after? It sounds like you moved, and did things improve for you?
Yeah, so that was end of 2013, so around Christmas time, and I had a month off work, and this was a part of the plan, I suppose, to give myself a break from work. And I spent 2 weeks with my family in the countryside, and they very kindly disabled the router and disconnected the cordless phones and plugged in the old corded phones. Hello, they were still there, and stuff like that. And that was lovely. And then I returned to Sydney and moved in basically with my friends. Or I actually made the move beforehand. My father helped me.
Mm-hmm.
He came 8-hour drive to help me, because really physically at that point it was almost like post-exercise fatigue. So I couldn't really do much exercise without being hammered the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So even lifting boxes, going down a few stairs and stuff would have been a problem. Dad helped me. So really in that sort of month, I think I have to fair to say, initially I felt a little bit like body cold, like as if like a
Right.
cold, not the flu, but a cold, as if my body felt like I was having a cold, but I didn't get a cold.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just felt better and better. And that month, and I also decided at the time, look, there's no point me catching a bus for 2 hours one way to get to work, which was the option, or drive. So I bought a car. I had never owned a car before.
Mm.
And that was to help protect me in the commute, I suppose. And then after a month, I started work again, and the nausea, the bit dizziness, the headaches, not migraines, but the headaches, the fatigue stuff just came back at work, and work was a huge issue.
So how about the people like at work, or the people in your life, or your friends, your family? Like, were they during that transition when you actually learned about the potential of EHS with the EMF interactions? It sounds like it was like 2011, 2012, 2013, kind of in that range. Were people receptive to you? Did you actually tell them about like what you thought it was, or did they think it was just totally something different? I mean, did you have a mixture of people? Like, I'm curious about like the people in your local circle of friends and family, what they thought about your
Well,
telling them.
yeah, from 2005 to 2012, like my social life became almost non-existent, really. So your social circle when you're seriously sick gets smaller, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
but before I left the city, who was I talking to? My good friend who was the scientist. I've got a scientific background, so we could shoot the breeze about, what she was hearing and reading. And before I left the city, I had some very good close friends who knew I was sick. But, I think people they're not great. People aren't hugely, it's hard to be sympathetic and empathetic if it's not a diagnosis, or there is no diagnosis. There's no diagnosis. It's hard for people to get their heads around. And I looked fine. I mean, I think I looked really exhausted at some stages, but I looked fine. Basically, I think I've looked better in my life than that period, but I looked okay. So I think when I actually left the city and was moving in with my good friends, I didn't tell people why.
Okay.
Aside from my family. So my family knew, but I didn't tell very good friends, some of whom are like, the classic skeptics about everything. And I thought, I cannot deal with a doctor who's a classic skeptic about everything. I can't deal with this, right? So I just thought, I'm going to try this. And so after trying it and experiencing a big difference, then I felt more comfortable about telling people. That's actually why I've gone to live with my friends. And of course I had a manager who was a very high-flying, worked for partner in one of the big consultancy firms. and she lived near me, and she was my manager at the time. And I thought, I can't not tell her why I'm leaving the centre of the known universe in Sydney, the glamour spot, to live in the burbs with my friends, for God's sake, with children, you know. So I did tell her, but only because I felt like I would get, what the heck, why are you going, you know, I'd get these questions, and I just thought it's ridiculous not to explain to her why, but I said it's in confidence why I'm explaining this. But yeah, I didn't tell friends, not to start with, why I left the city.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. Like, I'm just outright, I just tell everybody straight out, this is what's going on. And I'm like, it's the EMF, you know, like I'm more that way in the last like 5-6 years.
Oh, look, I'm like that now, but at that point, so 212 in Australia, there's not much on the airways about this issue at all. And I think actually when it's brought up in the media, people are frequently ridiculed and so forth. So I work in, you know, health and public health and a lot of doctors, and I thought, I just can't deal with these people. I can't explain well enough. I'm hammered completely, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah.
And I think my friend is onto something, but I didn't want to deal with trying to explain to very competent medical technical people when I didn't think I could.
Yeah, I think about this issue also like back in the past, like in the 60s and 70s, where people in the military were coming down with microwave illnesses, and it was being dealt with more on a confidential side, you know, way back then. But now that we just have so much exposure to this in the public, it's going to be out. Like at some point, this is going to burst into the public eye. I don't know when that's going to happen.
I think the situation is changing qualitatively and quantitatively kind of about now. And I think there's a big shift. And so, yeah, and I'm more comfortable because I'm better. I'm a lot better. I'm not so just beaten down by it all. And I'm more confident in my opinion that there's an issue here for some people in particular. And for the general population, I think we need to be more careful.
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. Like you mentioned, you got yourself a car for like almost like a mitigation strategy. So now that you're living out in the burbs and you have to actually commute into Sydney, what other like strategies do you have in place for mitigating things, or what do you do to like try to heal yourself now compared to back then?
Well, so I think it's taken a bit of learning, hasn't it? Like I've got a very good integrative medicine doctor, so that's, you know, Western medicine and Eastern medicine trained doctor. So some supplements I think have helped. But that when I was very sick in the city, it's almost like a supplement would help and I'd feel better for a bit, and then my body would go, like it sort of did something and then nothing. But beyond, so the supplement I'm talking about specifically is a good ginkgo, seems to help with my brain. And so I've had 2.5 weeks off. I haven't used it because I haven't been in the city, sort of thing. Yeah, but back to work, I will use that. But I think really key things have been, and it's taken some learning, is location of my home. So I'm renting in the lower Blue Mountains of Sydney, so that I decided to move there because I could access the city as I needed to for work, but also there was an option to catch the train if I had to. So, and as my work changed, we had parking at work, then I didn't. So really I couldn't catch the train after a certain point. I couldn't drive after a certain point. And it's a brutal commute, like it's such heavy traffic. So do you really want to drive in that traffic? No. But anyway, I lost that option. But then onto the train, which was very, very difficult for me. But in terms of how I cope now, location of house and home, I've got a reasonably good RF meter, and just finding out where the major transmitters were in the area and then coming to this house. And I think still I was quite affected. I remember coming to this house and going into the house, and the people who were leaving still had boxes everywhere. They were meant to have gone 2 days earlier. So I get inside and the RF levels go through the roof, and I'm just going, oh, this is too much for my head. I can't cope. It's really low outside. I really couldn't cope with this you know, and I went, oh my God, what if there's something in here that I can't turn off and I don't know enough about this technically? And of course I phoned my friend who never answers her mobile phone, and she answered the phone. I said, there's something in front on top of the roof. What do you think that is? And she said, okay, go inside. It'll be a baby monitor. It'll be the Wi-Fi. No, it's not what's on top of the roof, la da 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 da. And so I found this house, and so that's been good. But I think after I stayed with my friends, I tried to live in a little granny flat closer to the city, so it was connected to a home. I measured certain things that were reasonable. I mean, the RF was probably a little bit higher than what, but I wanted to give it a go. But then, of course, the little old lady who owned the home wasn't there, so she wasn't drawing on the electricity supply very much. When she got back on, turned everything on, dirty electricity levels went through the roof. And so I realised, and I was very, very sick there for 6 months for my lease. And I just went, Kate, you need to be able to control your power supply and not rely on somebody else's shonky use of electronics drawing on power that you can't control. So a separate house, so at least I can turn off the circuit breakers regardless of what's going on in the power wiring, and if there's power wiring issues and stuff like that, has been very good. The location, and I suppose avoiding exposures, and I've managed to, where I can at work, I suffer at work a lot, and work's been a big issue because I'm in research and that's 1 year contracts, so I've been negotiating based on you know, very short time frames, really, in a sense, with workplace health and safety. But I've got a new job that's 3 year contract, and they're being reasonable with documentation from my doctor using the European Association of Environmental Medicine guidelines. So that's helped, and that means I can work a lot more at home at the moment. At the moment, but I'm still expected to jump on the train and get to the city. You know, we'll see. I'll try and wheedle out of some of that.
So the people you are around, like either on the train or at work and such, like everybody's got some gadget of some kind these days. That's usually, you know, back and forth from some emitter, from a mobile phone tower, from something, right? Or a router. So do you physically feel different when you're like on the train around people with their gadgets, or is it kind of more like a cumulative thing to you? Like I'm curious about like the manifestation of what you're feeling around some of this when the density of the RF gets higher, or just like the proximity of where you're around people, that kind of stuff.
So I suppose if I get on the train and, you know, it's a filled train with everyone's got a device, you know, most people got a device or two. I usually feel a bit dizzy straight away.
Okay.
And not enough to fall over. Dizzy and a bit nauseous, like a spike of nausea. And then it settles down and I can cope with the morning commute and then get off the train, walk to the office. This is when I used to work in the city. Walk to the office, get in the office and feel pretty average and dizzy, and then it'd settle a little bit, and then sort of over time the nausea would just build up over the day, and sort of weakness and sore muscles, and especially on the train, sore joints, and over the week it would get worse, I suppose, if I'm eating a number of times. Head pressure, headaches. I haven't had a migraine since I left the city and really cleaned up of my overnight exposure. But I have to say 4G, the deployment, is a much harder network for me to deal with, just because in Australia people are using devices to stream and wirelessly a lot more data now. So previously I used to leave my old office and feel much better, and then get on the train and go, oh, just get home, oh God. And it's an hour train ride, and then I'd get off in my little village and just get off the train and go, oh God, I feel so much better, you know, oh, so good to be here. Go home, have a glass of wine, have dinner, not do much, and collapse.
Yeah.
And do it all again. So yeah, so my symptoms, like I went into the city the other day, I've got shielding on my car windows so that reduces the radio frequency exposure. I did that because I was driving on the major arterial roads around Sydney, and people in Sydney will know the M7, the Motorway 7, the M5, the M4, and that a lot of those transport corridors, I think probably because of the zoning, have very big transmitters. And I was just starting to drive into the city, and I'd be feeling fine at home in my car without shielding at this stage, and just getting waves of nausea. And I was thinking, God, I've got to do something about this. So with shielded car, I can get to the city okay now and last for a little bit without feeling too sick, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm finding, I don't know how it is there in Australia. Here in the States, if I look on a heat map of different microwave exposures, you can always see that on the major corridors there is just like, you know, intense red, like this is where all the RF microwave is going down these corridors, because people have their mobile phones in the cars, they're always transmitting, they're not putting in airplane mode when they're driving on the freeways or highways. And then you also have a lot of the cars themselves actually now output a lot of microwave, for instance, in their cruise control units. There's all, you know, some of the modern cars will just, you know, have more dashboard exposures, everything, you know, the whole EMF soup is just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And in places along here on the West Coast, we have like about every 2 or 3 miles, we have cell phone towers. Or just like, you know, small emitters, even stuff on top of rooftop buildings, where if you're really perceptive and you look around just as you're driving down a freeway or highway, you're just going to see just constant, you're just like, you know, in that soup all the time when you're on the roads. It's becoming even a problem for me, like, you know, with my issues that I get when I'm on a freeway for a long time. It's just kind of like you're saying, this additive thing that as the day goes on, if I'm like doing a long drive on a long highway, I'll just feel really worn down, more lethargic, have more issues with my tinnitus or my eye issues, things like that.
Yeah, so friends of mine who are more electro-hypersensitive than me really struggle on the roads now. And these are people who I would describe as, in the last couple of years, have had limited ability to even go anywhere, right? So if they've got to a point where they've improved a little bit, they're shocked at the number of towers that have popped up, and they feel it quite strongly. Yeah, in their cars. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess now's a good time to switch gears a little bit, like get the joke there, switch gears with the car. We're going to switch, we're going to switch gears and talk about, I wanted to hear more about your Canaries idea and your project that you're thinking about. And I'm wondering how the idea came about in the first place.
Well, it's not really just my idea. It's my friend who I went to university with who helped me. And of course, we're always shooting the breeze about this issue. And most electro-hypersensitive people in Australia of a certain age will sort of say, oh, canary in the coal mine, that old, you know, saying. And I think I'm noticing that quite a few younger people don't know that expression, and people from different sort of ethnic backgrounds don't always know it. But for those who don't, back in the old days, 100 years or so ago, the coal miners used to take a little cage with a canary underground with them. And when the canary, you know, fell off its little perch, they knew that the oxygen levels were dropping too low and they had to get out. So this kind of, you know, we're just the canaries in the coal mine. We're just the canaries. And so it was always going, we're just the canaries. And I was thinking about the metaphor and the sort of metaphorical meaning. It's a beautiful yellow bird, and it's the colour of the sun. It's a songbird that doesn't sing all the time. So it sort of sings when needed. And yeah, I was just like the imagery of it. And then my friend came back to me and said, I've come up with this acronym. So it's Canaries Australia. So we've got a little Facebook page that, you know, my friend puts a little bit of information on, not much. But this year the plan is to actually get it set up as a charity status, not-for-profit organisation, and try and, depending on the capacity of people, because at the moment we're keeping it small, but we want to raise the awareness of the, I suppose, evidence of scientific evidence of harm associated with these artificial forms of non-ionizing radiation, but also and awareness of the issue, if we can, of electrohypersensitivity, because, you know, I didn't talk about it for a long time, and it is a reputational risk for people who are especially trying to stay in the workforce, if you can do that. But, you know, it's too easy for governments or anyone to claim that this is not an issue because our little canaries are not speaking up. And I completely understand why they're not. So we're considering how to somehow come up with case reports, if that's appropriate, to be de-identified, etc. But also, secondarily, we want to look at disability status for electrohypersensitivity caused, you know, a functional impairment, which is the new term for disability, caused by an environmental agent. And with disability status flows access rights, and people need access to healthcare, people need access to workplaces, people need access to education, and without being sick. And then there's potential, you know, the access to pension if they're really, really sick and can't function. But yeah, so working on the objectives now and considering who might be involved, and that it'll likely be people who are electro-hypersensitive. And so for someone like me, trying to maintain work and work on the computer, I suppose, is a bit of an issue for me. So I can manage it for 7 hours, but 10 hours becomes... So, yeah, so Canaries Australia. So it's there. Could be Canaries America, Canaries Germany.
That's wonderful. Yeah, like you got me thinking there about how just like the messaging, because we think about this all the time at EMF Warriors, like how do you get the public to change? And I think really this is one major avenue that I've always been thinking about in the last, like, I know, year or so. But in our educational institutions, like in schools, at universities and colleges, a lot of people just never even learn about the physics side of it and the potential interaction of the biophysics. There's that, but then that also is like chaining up to the people that will go into hospitals, the nurses, the doctors, all the, you know, paramedics, anyone that will have some medical training, and they're not trained in it. So we have this really crazy dilemma right now, because like a person like myself or you, that we go to see a doctor, it's like, until we really describe all of it to them, it's almost like we have to change their minds to let them know, hey, this is a real thing. I know you haven't really gotten much of this training in the past, unless they've had other patients that have had it as well. So I see that as like this really, that's where the barrier actually is. Like, imagine we lived in a world where doctors actually fought for us, and we'd go in there and they'd be like, oh yeah, this is EHS, and you're probably, your environment's your main problem here, and this is what you need to do to try to fix yourself. Like, imagine if that was happening right now, and doctors could, like, the doctors that probably, as we move into the future, into a more tech world, those doctors that jump on this will be the ones that will have a really good reputation for themselves, but also, like, they're going to be the ones that will probably investigate this issue and really get into the science and the details and find all the information, you know, the 40, 50 years of information that's in the science on it, and then help spread it among other doctors. That's what has to happen at this point, or it's just going to be a very slow transition. It's going to be up to us to, like, do what we can to convince them in their busy schedules, you know, working crazy hours and number of days and such, right?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of thoughts on, you know, this sort of how things might change. And I do think, I've always thought young children it's like a wedge with children. It's a classic wedge that you start with the kids because they're an at-risk population. But really, when you drill down into kids, for example, autism and that sort of, you know, kids on the autism spectrum disorder, I think perhaps that group of parents might be more open, maybe, to learning a little bit about, hey, this might be impacting your kid's behaviour. But then when I look at doctors, see, you know, in reality, like, and the European Environmental Association of Environmental Medicine guidelines, it's a very complex document. But in reality, the best fix is to avoid exposures, right? So, you know, so doctors could look for genetic this, they could do, you know, find the best supplement for this, but the reality is, for electrohypersensitive people and people who are sensitizing, is to reduce exposures, right? In the world where everyone's demanding more. So it's a funny sort of kind of position, I think. But having said that, I do think the medical profession is at risk, because if they don't get their heads around this problem, they're at risk of causing, you know, recommending scans, for example, maybe an MRI, that might exacerbate somebody's electrohypersensitivity. So they're actually at risk, a liability risk here, if they don't get their heads around this. So, and maybe part of it is an education campaign specifically geared towards the, you know, medical community, because, yeah, they are busy. In Australia, they've got so many patients coming through. This is a complex area. And I found doctors willing to listen, yeah, for sure, once I became more knowledgeable. But they still don't know oh, gosh, they get it, okay, we've got to turn off the Wi-Fi, okay. But, oh, the Wi-Fi's out there and it's in the office and I can't, you know, everybody uses it. So they're sort of a little bit double bind and they get it. So, yeah, but I think there's a risk to doctors.
Yeah, the liability front of it is really intriguing because, you know, it hits on so many different levels. Obviously, you know, like even Lloyd's of London, you know, reported back in like 2014 or 2015 of potentially not insuring this issue. I don't know where they still stand on that, but it's going to become a bigger liability when, you know, as we're moving into a more technical world, we're just going to have more exposures, and we're looking at, like, you know, Sydney and different major cities becoming smart cities. So people will be saturated in this. And, you know, the way I see it is there's going to be a certain portion of the population like us that will come down with EHS. And we're probably going to reach a tipping point of, you know, whatever it is, like 15% or 18% of the population is expressing some issues around low frequencies and the high frequencies. But then the other expressions, the other disease expressions, like you mentioned, autism, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, everything else, all the other neurological, cardiovascular, metabolic issues that are potentially tied to EMF exposures as well, just with oxidative stress. So we've got, you know, people that are focusing on, oh, this is an, you know, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or this is Alzheimer's, and this is this disease. And doctors are hyper focused on just looking at the disease and thinking, oh, genetics, and thinking, you know, biochemistry, rather than thinking, wait a minute, epigenetics, this could be environmentally caused, and have an actual relationship to different disease expressions based on, yes, our genetics, but are more of potentially our mitochondrial genetics and how our maternal inheritance came down the line for us, and why we're starting to, you know, reach a certain rate of that energy production starts failing in the mitochondria in certain specific tissues, then this disease could manifest. So the link here is huge. Like any like toxic exposure or poisonous or carcinogen has this potential of, you know, expressing a wide range of diseases in us. And we shouldn't be viewing this as like independent disease over here in this corner, another independent disease over here in this corner. That's the way I'm seeing this issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, like, I've for a long time thought this is a mitochondrial issue for me. And because, you know, you end up with no energy, that's, you know, that's a metabolic disease. Like, that's a metabolic problem, and it's bloody mitochondria, your energy. And I've thought, yes, this is knocking out my mitochondria. Hello, I don't like it. And what can I do about it to try and balance this out while, regain your energy and your strength and so forth, and to move forward in a more proactive way, aside from just trying to survive, I suppose, and subsist, which I think that some of the electro-hypersensitive people I know of are struggling, like really, really seriously. Like, I can interface with work. Most of the others I know are not interfacing because they've got a partner who supports them and they're worse than me.
Mm-hmm.
And so these people are sort of off the radar. That's hence Canaries Australia, to try and raise the profile of the issue of people severely impacted.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done some things like over the past 3 years myself, and I was saying it would work for anybody else, but that morning sunlight is key because that has helped re-strengthen my eyes and some of my eye issues. Really getting rid of a lot of the other stressors coming into your life. I'm not talking about people, but like I'm like the caffeine, because everyone knows like taking caffeine in the evening is going to disrupt your circadian rhythm potentially. So I just like, once I went cold turkey on the caffeine, a lot of my symptoms, especially the tinnitus, just pretty much fell off. Like I say, it's like now it's around 10%. Like, it will activate in magnetic fields specifically, like real, or if I have the phone closer to my head for a few minutes, I'll hear the tinnitus kick in, and it will usually last for 10, 15, 20 minutes. But without the caffeine now sometimes I can actually, the tinnitus, the amount, or it will like come on for just a little bit and go away really fast. So it's like, personal observations about certain things I was feeding myself back in the day, not realizing the connections of other things that was disrupting the circadian rhythm. And really that morning light helps to set the circadian rhythm in the morning as well. So it's like a double benefit there for me.
Yeah, so I, as you know, I sort of only learned about EMF Warriors, the website, not so long ago, and I've been keeping an eye on the website and the Facebook page. And I have to say, hands down, the morning light, big difference to me. So, and when you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, which I think a friend of mine said, oh, EHS is just like chronic fatigue syndrome 20 years ago. And I remember thinking, and one of the big issues for a lot of people when they're claiming harms with EHS, one of the top symptoms is like this bone crushing fatigue. Like, people don't get, we're not talking about a bit tired here, we're talking about bone crushing fatigue. And so when this friend said this is like chronic fatigue syndromes 20 years ago, I just thought, nah, this is like chronic fatigue syndrome on steroids with neurological symptoms. Like, this it's the same thing. It's like the same thing but worse. Like, and anyhow, so I was always interested in the mitochondria stuff because I decided myself there's a mitochondrial issue. And so, yeah, I really like the information on EMF Warriors website and Jack Cruz's stuff on mitochondria and sunlight, the earth, your eyes, all this kind of stuff. So it's helped me, and it's actually helped EHS sufferers I've recommended morning sun to.
That's wonderful. Well, EMF Warriors, we're going to do everything we can to support your Canaries project. Like whatever, if you need any help from us or support from us, we'll join forces and we'll be there, backing you all the way. So yeah, if there's anything else, you need, just don't hesitate at all to contact Jason or myself or Jamie for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and I'm sure people get a lot of insights out of this. And I guess I'll be seeing you on the Facebook page. Should talk more about how things progress for us.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Scott.
All right. Thank you.
Everybody.